guys, we are back in Vegas. Sorry for the bad lighting situation. Let me give you a tour of the room before we head out. So for this trip, we're staying at the Signature at MGM, which is different from MGM Grand. This is a suite, so it's a little bit different from a hotel. It's more like a tiny studio. We've got a fully stocked kitchen and then typical hotel restroom and bedroom. So definitely a small upgrade from some of the places I've stayed before, but it was pretty cheap. And also only about a 5-minute walk from the strip. Also guys, one more thing. Today is my 7th 22nd birthday. So if you guys would leave a like on this video, I'd very much appreciate that. Hopefully we'll have a winning session today, and yeah, see you at the tables. I grabbed lunch really quickly at the Modern Vegan before heading out. When I get to the Wynn, I find out that the self-parking is no longer free, but it turns out that it's not really ever going to be an issue for me. More on that later, but we buy in for $1,500, the usual, and let's play some hands. I was card dead for about the first hour and a half, not really getting involved in any big hands, and then I finally pick up ace deuce of hearts in early position. The under the gun player limps, I bump it up to 20 from +2, and both the button and the under the gun limper call. So we're going to the flop 3 ways, and it comes down 7 queen deuce with 2 clubs. We don't really get what we're looking for, which is something like a top pair or a nut flush draw, but we do have bottom pair, and on this board I'm going to be betting most of the time anyways, so when the under the gun player checks to me, I put out a c-bet of $20. Both of my opponents call, which isn't good for us, but the turn brings the deuce of diamonds, so we kind of get an unexpected strong hand here. We've got trips, and it should be pretty disguised. Under the gun checks once again, and I decide to continue betting here. I do want to get value from some top pairs, so I make it 70. Both of my opponents fold, and we take this one down. Wish I had gotten more value, but I still think betting the turn is fine. Checking is also a reasonable option, I think, but in general, I think just going for value against top pair is the normal play. I'm in under the gun with ace king of hearts, and I open it to $20 and get 3 calls. So 4 ways to a flop, which comes down king high. It's 10 king 8 with 2 diamonds. We've got top pair, top kicker. Really good situation for us, although the board is pretty coordinated here. So definitely going to put out a bet. I make it 55, sizing up a little bit because of how many players are in the hand and the board texture, and only the player on the button calls. The turn is a very safe 5 of clubs. We should still have the best hand here as long as we were good on the flop. I decided to bet $80 here. I think normally I size up in these spots, but I guess I just wanted to get a call from my opponent and set up for a reasonable size shove on the river. I would have about 250 into a pot of 350 on the river with this sizing, and I guess I just want to do this so that when I do have bluffs, I can put maximum pressure on the river shove. But I think against this specific player, it would just be better for me to bet bigger on the turn and then have a small bet behind the river just so that he feels obligated to call. And of course, if he has a flush draw or something, we are getting more value with a bigger bet here. But he ends up just calling here. The river comes the jack of hearts. Ace, queen, and queen 9 make a straight here, but I guess I wasn't afraid of those because I just decide to shove here for 255, and my opponent ends up just folding, so looks like he might have had a busted flush draw or maybe just some kind of medium strength hand and just couldn't call a third bet. So we win another nice pot. Again, not too eventful, but it's nice to win a hand after being card dead for so long. I have 10-9 suited in the big blind this time. There are 4 limps, the small blind completes, and I'm obviously raising it up here. We're going to thin the field. I make it $30. 2 of the early position limpers call, and so does the big blind. So 4 ways to a flop. It comes down king 5-9, 2 spades. We've got middle pair here. The small blind checks. I decided at the time to check as well since I have some showdown value and it was multi-way, but I think I could definitely bet small on this board. Action ends up checking through. The turn comes down the 8 of diamonds, putting a second diamond on the board. We now have a flush draw to go along with our middle pair, and once the small blind checks to me, given that pretty much any player with a top pair should have been betting on the flop, I expect that I might actually be good here, but we don't want to see any scary river cards, so I decide to actually bet small here and try to get folds from my opponents. I make it 45. It does not go as planned because all 3 of my opponents call. So yeah, I guess everyone could have a piece of this board. It's very coordinated, 2 flush draws, potential straights already possible. The river is the jack of hearts, so none of the flush draws get there. The small blind checks once again, and I decide to just check here, try to take my showdown value against all the other players. Everyone else checks as well, and the small blind ends up showing that he had jack 10 offsuit, so he rivered second pair and ends up beating our pair of 9s. We lose our first small pot of the day. There's a straddle for this next hand. I'm in under the gun +2 with pocket aces. Under the gun +1 gets out of the way. I bump it up to $35. Folds all the way back to the straddler, and he makes the call. We are going to a flop of ace, jack, 9, rainbow. We flop top set, guys. My opponent checks to me, and I'm not going to make the mistake that I've made many times in the vlog and bet on this board. We've got it pretty locked up here. I check back. We're going to set the trap. The turn comes the 7 of diamonds, putting a flush draw on the board, but we're not afraid of this card. He decides to bet $60 into a pot of around 80, so pretty big bet. I think for a bit, debating between flatting or raising here. I think raising is fine. I mean, I have a great hand, and I've kind of set the trap. The board's also kind of coordinated. He could have some strong draws here, maybe pair plus straight draw or something like that. But I ultimately decided to just flat since he can't really have monsters. I'm blocking like ace-jack, ace-9, things like that. And if he has jack-9, so be it. We're just going to let him hang himself here. And of course, we do want to keep his bluffs in. So I flat. We're headed to a river card, and it comes down the deuce of clubs. A deuce on the river rarely changes anything. We're hoping for a bet, and my opponent answers our prayers. He bets 225. An overbet on the river. I have no idea what he's repping here, and I'm like 100% sure he's bluffing here, but obviously I'm just going to raise anyways because why not? I don't think I'm going to get value, so I just think for a bit and raise to 500. Basically just min raising because I know he's bluffing, and there's just not really any way I'm getting value regardless. This just looks super strong from my position. Also, looking at the hand now, I realize he could have something like 10-8, but it's just unlikely. I mean, I guess he could have played it this way, but it doesn't really matter though because he does end up just folding. I mean, so far the session has just been, you know, not super interesting hands, but we're just winning hands, which is all we can really ask for. I don't think any of the hands were particularly played well or played horribly. We're just getting those medium-sized wins we need to book a profit, and that's all I can ask for. We've got pocket kings now, guys. Yeah, the birthday luck doesn't stop. This is very reminiscent of last year when I played at Commerce Casino for my birthday, and I had a really good session there and just won like every hand. Anyways, I'm in under the gun and I make it $20, and I get called by the +1 player and the hijack. So 3 ways to a flop. It comes down ace high with 2 hearts here. Not exactly what I like to see, but I think people tend to get like way too scared whenever an overcard comes and they have some kind of strong pocket pair. You don't have to always play passively and think it's over. You can continue playing your range, and my range is I have a lot of strong aces here sometimes. So I just put out a $20 c-bet, which is what I would normally do with most of my range anyways. I think checking is more standard, especially since it's 3 ways, so maybe that's a better option, but you do sometimes need to bet anyways, since if you always play under pairs by checking when an overcard comes out, it just becomes super readable, especially in 4-bet, 5-bet pots. It's totally fine to sometimes bet in these spots, and it allows you to continue repping ace-x hands on later streets if you need to. Not saying that the bet in this situation was necessarily good, but you're sometimes just going to have to be able to do it. And I only get called by the hijack, so we're going to a turn card. It's the king of clubs. We turn a set. What's new? Life is good. I bet $70 this time. We're putting out a big bet here because I'm targeting hands like ace-x. There are 2 flush draws on the board now, so he could have plenty of draws. He looks at his cards as if he's going to fold, but then eventually just calls here, and at the time I put him on something like a weak ace. The river comes down the 3 of spades, so any 5 now makes a straight. It's not super likely he has something like that. I expect he has just like ace-x, like I said. I decide to check here, hoping that'll take a stab with a busted flush draw, or maybe value bet an ace. But I think betting small here perhaps could be better, because then I could get value from those medium strength aces or any other type of hands he could have, as opposed to letting him take showdown value. He ends up checking back here, and once I show my hand, I am good. Perhaps not the best check. I might have lost some value here, not really sure, but let me know what you guys think. Okay guys, we're gonna take a break from playing just premiums here. I've got queen 9 suited for this one, and it's a fun one. I'm in the hijack, and I make it $35 over a straddle, and 3 players call me, so 4 ways to a flop, which comes down 5, queen, 3 with 2 hearts. We've got top pair here. Don't have a super strong kicker, and it is 4-handed as well, so someone could have a piece of this board, but we definitely have to bet once 2 players check to me because we got to deny equity and get some value from flush draws. So I bet 65 here, not too big. The player in the cutoff almost instantly raises to 215 here, and I'm going to give you guys a little tip with timing tells. Quick raises usually are pretty weak. Obviously, there are always going to be exceptions, and, you know, fake tells are always a thing. But generally speaking, if you actually have a strong hand, you take some time and try to think about how to get value from the other player. Plus, this pot is multi-way, which I think would make him think more about it. And earlier in the session, I had seen this player raise over a few limps in the big blind with something like 10-9 offsuit or something, and then double barrel on a board with multiple players, and he had to show down that he had a bluff and really had no equity. So this definitely was a guy who wasn't afraid to bluff sometimes. The other two players in the hand fold, and I've got a decision here because my opponent is about $700 effective in this spot, and given the situation, I'm pretty sure all the money's going in. If I do decide to call here, I don't think he's just going to give up on the bluff. With Queen 9 here, I honestly think my hand is just going to be good against all bluffs anyways, even with the weak kicker. So I ultimately just decide I don't believe my opponent, and I'm going to call with the intention of calling off a shove if he shoves turn, unless a really bad card comes perhaps. But honestly, if a heart comes, I don't know if he's just insta-raising with the heart draw anyways. I think I just decide to call. Anyways, we're going to a turn card. It is the deuce of spades, honestly as blank as it gets, even though ace-4 gets there. And I'm ready to call off the shove, so I check it over to him, and instead of shoving, he actually decides to bet $300 here after thinking for a while. And at this point, guys, I was pretty certain I was good. I saw this as him just trying to save money on a bluff. Instead of shoving here, he could bet 300 and just save the remaining amount because I'm going to call a bigger bet anyways. So he decides to give it one last shot, and in my head at least, it didn't work and he's going to give up. The river is the 7 of spades. Shouldn't be relevant in my opinion, and he quickly checks. My suspicions seem to be correct, and once I check back, he kind of shakes his head and looks like he's given up. I show my hand, and he kind of moves his cards around before eventually mucking. So we win a nice one here, caught a bluff early in the hand and committed to calling down, and it worked out for us. This is the first hand in the session that wasn't just purely run good. I think I earned the win this hand, so I'm happy about it, and we're still up a good amount. I get dealt ace-queen offsuit before I'm even able to stack my chips from the previous hand. I open it up to $20 from early position. The cutoff calls, and since it was a friendly table and I had been running really well, I just held up my cards so that the player to my right could see them, since he and I had been talking, and you'll learn more about him in later hands. My opponent in this hand loosely resembled Billy from Peaky Blinders, and at some point in the session he had asked about my vlog, and once I told him the name, he says that he's pretty sure he had stumbled across them at some point. The flop comes down king deuce 3 with 3 clubs, so we have the nut flush draw. I'm pretty sure I decided to bet 15 or 20 here, doesn't really matter though, but I think checking is also a viable option. I block hands that he could call with that are worse than mine since I have the ace of clubs, and I have the nut nothing, so yeah, I think just a check is probably better here, but my opponent ends up calling. The turn brings the 7 of diamonds. I held up my cards once again so that the player to my right could see, and I decided to bet 45 this time. My opponent calls once again, so not looking good for us. I'm about ready to give up. The river comes the 8 of spades, and I just don't see a reason to continue my bluff. I'm really only repping a flush, which obviously I could have, but if my opponent called all the way down like this with a king, he probably thinks I either have a flush or nothing, and he's probably just going to call it down. So I just check it over to him, and he checks back. I say that I have ace high, and he shows king jack of hearts. So he did in fact have a king, and I can't really make out what he said next.
The way you were holding it, I was like, this guy just fucking nuts on it.
I think he was basically saying the way I was holding my cards up, he thinks I had the nut flush draw or something, but not really sure. Either way, holding up my cards probably backfired here, but I don't think I would have gotten him to fold anyways. I was up to a stack of around 2.6k, and I was ready to head out since my parking was going to expire, but someone actually mentioned to me that I could get my ticket validated by the staff at the poker room, and because of that, parking is effectively still free for me at the Wynn since I only really come here to play poker, so I decided to stay and play some more hands. I've got ace-queen offsuit again, this time in the big blind. An early position player makes it $15. The cutoff and small blind call. I'm next to act here, and I decide to squeeze here for $70. It's a good spot for me to squeeze. The original raiser folds, the cutoff flats, and the small blind decides to back raise shove to about 300 something. He was a younger guy, and he was very clearly new to playing at the Wynn since when he came in, he had asked what the max was and then decided to bind for $500 anyways. He was the player I mentioned earlier who was sitting directly to my right. Action is now on me, and I'm definitely ahead of the small blind's general range, but since the cutoff is still in the hand, I do want to isolate, and the cutoff shouldn't ever be ahead of me here since he flatted the original raise and then flatted my squeeze. So I decide to look at his stack, see how much he has, and he's got about 1k behind, so I decide that I'm going to shove to isolate. I put him all in, and of course, once action's on the cutoff, he folds. We are now all in against the small blind.
Good luck.
I have ace queen.
Good luck. Oh, wow. Oh, I thought you had nines. Okay. I was like, wow. Alright.
We end up winning the run out and winning a decent sized pot without having to do too much work. The session is still going really strong. One thing about this player was that he had constantly been ordering mimosas throughout the night and was definitely drinking beforehand as well. He drank around 10 to 12 mimosas throughout the session, only needing to use the restroom once. Nick Airball could only dream of having such a strong bladder.
And that made me like drink a lot of liquids because I cotton mouth and then I go pee a lot.
This opponent made it very clear that he was very happy to just give away money and he was just waiting for someone to stack him basically.
Let me have my day. They let you have your day. You just don't remember.
I'm not drinking today. I mean,
how much more do
drinking
I...
a chamomile tea.
Oh, come on, guys. Like, I'm like the drunkest guy here. How much more do I need to drink?
You're for sure the drunkest.
I'm like 2 champagne bottles in. My pops lied to me. He made me order another champagne. I have to finish it. 2/3 at least. This is traumatizing. Okay, come on, dude. You're gonna order a mimosa. Would you mind first? Order a mimosa when they come. Because it's one mimosa per person. That's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem. It is a problem. I need to be double fisted, bro. It's not the American dream. I need to be double fisted. That's what she said.
Okay. Okay. Alright.
I don't want to be around.
He was a really cool dude and was also from SoCal, and since I didn't get his name, we'll just call him Mimosa. Our next hand is against the same player who I failed to bluff earlier. I've got Queen 9 of diamonds, this time in the small blind. Early position limps, the button limps as well. I bump it up to $30 and both of the limpers call. So we are 3 ways to a flop. It comes down 6-4 queen with 2 spades. Fairly safe board for us. We've got top pair, okay kicker, and I decide to c-bet pretty small here. I make it $35. The big blind folds and the player in +1 calls. The turn brings these 7 of clubs, putting a second flush draw on the board and making it definitely a little more wet. I think I could check here, which I would normally do with some weaker top pairs, but given that there are 2 flush draws, I still think I can charge those types of hands, so I decide to continue betting, this time making it $90. He calls once again. The river comes down, the 8 of clubs, which isn't a great card. It doesn't complete the front door flush, but it does complete the back door flush and puts out 4 to a straight on the board. Not the best card for me, so I decide to check here. And unfortunately, my opponent does not check back, which is what we want to see. He bets 150 here, and it's kind of an annoying spot because it's not a huge bet, and I am beating any bluff he has. My Queen 9 should be good, but I just don't think this opponent is really bluffing that much in this spot. Regardless, I pretty much snap called, feeling like I needed to with top pair here. He ends up showing King 5 of clubs. He had an overcard and all sorts of backdoors on the flop, turned the perfect card to continue with, and then ended up rivering both a straight and a flush, but he only needed one of those since I only had a queen. This next hand might be my favorite one of the session. I remember it very differently in my head, but the notes say something else, so I'll talk about that after the hand. But I have Ace-Jack offsuit in the big blind, supposedly. The hijack opens to $15, the cutoff calls. I decide to 3-bet here to 60, and both of my opponents call. As of now, my read on both players was that they were both pretty standard, solid ABC players. The flop comes down 4 Queen 3 with 2 clubs. I put out a c-bet of $75 and both of my opponents call, so that is not a good sign. What's even worse is that the turn comes the King of clubs. Very, very bad card here. It's likely that my opponents could have called with a flush draw, and this is also one of the few high cards that just doesn't improve my hand at all, although we do pick up a gut shot. Even if I were to have a king in this spot, I think I sometimes would check anyways due to the flush draw getting in, so I decided to check this time, and both of my opponents check back. So the river card comes down, the 3 of hearts, pairing the board, and it shouldn't have really changed anything here. And now I decide that given that my opponents checked back on the turn, I don't think they have a very strong hand here. I think they would simply bet a flush if they had hit it on the turn after I checked to them. If they have a king here, I'm likely to get called off by one of them. Regardless, for reasons I will mention after the hand's over, I decide this is a good spot to try to rep something like maybe ace-king or aces. I think I could reasonably rep a strong king here given that the king on the turn was a club, so maybe I could have reasonably checked for pot control and then now feel confident value betting with it. And I remember thinking that I could even reasonably rep something like aces that maybe checked the turn for pot control and now feels comfortable value betting. So I decide on a sizing of 225 to rep that kind of area of hands, and both of my opponents fold pretty quickly. So we take this one down with a nice little bluff. And now I would like to mention that I distinctly remember being in position in this hand and thinking to myself that I was glad I was in position because I could see them both check on the river and then realize they didn't have a strong hand. But according to my notes and according to the video, I was not on the button, which is really weird because I just specifically remember thinking on the river that they had both checked to me. And that made me feel more confident betting as a bluff here, which doesn't dramatically change the reasoning. I think the reasoning is kind of the same in both of my scenarios, but being in position would make my bluff a lot more justified, I think. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are either way, but it's just weird because I usually don't remember things this incorrectly. Big blind and button does change the hand a lot, but in my head, the flop went check, check, me betting 75, check, check, me checking back on the turn, and then check, check, me betting river, as opposed to me being the first to act each street. So let me know your thoughts. I don't really know what happened, but we won the hand. I saw an opportunity to make a play, and luckily it worked out. I've got one more for you guys. Of course, I have a premium in this one. I've got pocket queens in the big blind, the under the gun, cutoff, button, and small blind limp. I decide to bump it up to $35 here, and I get 3 callers. So we're going to a flop 4 ways. It comes down 7-7 deuce with 2 clubs. We do have a club as well. The small blind checks, and actions on me. I make it $65. Under the gun folds, and then the button, who was one of the good players I mentioned earlier, raises to $180. The small blind gets out of the way, and now we're heads up. I don't think I can really fold here, especially given that I have a club, but at the same time, my opponent's raising range is probably pretty narrow here. He is basically saying he has a 7, or he has some kind of really strong draw here. He's never going to have an overpair here, or even like 2 suited Broadway cards, since I think he would open with that instead of just limping. So I'm putting him on like some random 7x hand that he didn't want to raise pre-flop for whatever reason, and that makes it a little harder to call, but definitely can't just fold queen. So I call. The turn brings the 4 of clubs, so we're now 1 club away from a flush. I think I was somewhat worried about a flush at the time, but looking back on it, I think it's just more likely my opponent has 7x for his value range. So yeah, this shouldn't be too scary. I check it over to my opponent, and this time he bets $300. We're playing pretty deep, and this pot could definitely get really big. I'm likely going to have to face a big bet on the river, and to be honest, no matter what the river card is, unless it's a queen, I have no idea what I'm really going to do. So it's kind of tough to call here and then know that I might have to call a big bet on the river, but at the same time, I still felt like it was just weak to fold, although I think I can make a case for it now given that the flop was very multi-way and my opponent still decided to raise. So I decide to call. The river comes down. The 9 of diamonds. No help here. It does make the board a little more coordinated, but I doubt my opponent has something like 6-3 or 8-6 here, so it shouldn't really make a difference. I check to him once again, hoping that if he's bluffing, he'll just give up and we can get the showdown. But no, he decides to bet $700 this time, and after a while of thinking, I decided to fold. I think I should have just folded quicker, to be honest. I just don't think my opponent's range here is very bluff heavy, but it was hard for me to lay it down after calling on the turn and feeling like I'd have to call down if I think he's bluffing. But unfortunately, we lose a pretty big pot here. He doesn't end up showing, so we'll never know if we made a good fold here, but we're still up a lot of money. What makes this even better was that Mimosa had gone to the restroom during this hand, and when he comes back, he kind of slightly falls into me while trying to sit down since he had been drinking a lot. He apologizes, and then he just tosses me a black chip. I try to toss it back to him and let him know he tossed me a $100 chip, and he just gives it back and then says sorry. It wasn't even like a fall. He kind of just slightly bumped into me while tripping, but I will take it any day. I guess we could consider it a birthday donation.
You have to get bumped on him.
I know, right?
Yeah.
One bump is $100.
Honestly, you could punch me in the face and I'll take the rest if you want. At some point, he set an alarm on his phone for midnight and he had planned to leave at the time. He decides to leave a little bit earlier than that and takes a stack with him. So we weren't able to get into a good spot against him later in the session, and unfortunately, the table now is a little bit tougher. I decide, since it's almost the end of my birthday and with Mimosa gone, it's time to rack up and just book a win for the day.
Yeah, last meeting.
Oh, whoopsies. How's it going?
How are you?
Good, thanks.
You overstacked your Rex.
Sorry?
You overstacked your Rex. 2364.
I was in for $1,500 total, cashed out for $23.64, which makes for an $864 profit.
Thank you, love.
Alright guys, good birthday session. I overstacked my rack, as you guys heard, so I actually had $50 more than I thought. At the peak I was probably around 2,700 or so, but then lost some small hands and then lost that big hand against the player in seat 3 or something. So in that hand I think I lost like 500 or something. Unfortunate, but I think it is the correct fold. Obviously I have nothing to complain about, but when I'm just winning like hand after hand after hand after hand, then you know, losing that first big hand obviously feels a little bit worse. But I can't really ask too much more than that. We ran super hot for a very long time after being card dead for the first hour and a half or so. And yeah, now it's about midnight and I'm gonna find some place to eat. And then yeah, it's no longer my birthday, so the run good's gonna stop and we'll just have to pick it back up tomorrow. For a late dinner, I went to Madhouse Coffee, which is open 24/7, and if you guys told me I could get pesto gnocchi at 1 a.m., I would have probably believed you, but I would still be somewhat surprised. So this place was awesome, and it definitely will be on my list for go-to places late at night. Okay guys, while I'm importing the footage into my laptop, I'm just gonna finish up this vlog. We won a lot of money and only really lost a couple notable hands. Couldn't have asked for a better session, couldn't have asked for better content for the vlog, and we are gonna finish up the vlog for today. So thank you guys for joining me on my 7th 22nd birthday. Until next time I turn 22, make sure to give this video a like as a late birthday gift, and I will see you guys in the next poker vlog. Peace.